which is like Theo Roosevelt's idea of just putting a gun on the table and just being like, yeah, what you want to do, bro? Like, imagine that. I mean, in any conversation, we're just talking. I just put a gun on the table. Like, it changes things. So, in exchange for signing the treaty, Panama received $10 million dollars and an annuity of $250,000 beginning 9 years later. As stated, there was never a treaty printed in their native language, so yeah. So we're going to jump to building the canal. Build that canal. The majority of the workers on the canal were of Caribbean descent, and that's just worth noting because sometimes I feel like it gets lost in some of these articles and podcasts that I listen to. But there's a great podcast that I listen to called Working History, which really delves into the lives of the men who worked on the actual canal. And it's about the woman. The person they interview is a woman who's working on a book called that she's naming Box 25, and it's because the Box 25 is the number of the box that where these stories are stored, and I believe it's the the House of Congress. What's that? The Congressional Library, I believe, is there's Box 25 in there. So that's where all the people's stories of the men. And it's just there's one woman who's in there recorded, and their story. So she writes about that, and it's very interesting. I'm not even going to really go any more into that because I would butcher it. And then when I listened to it, I was like, this is actually pretty good. So I'll definitely direct you there if you want to know any more about the people. But so I never had any idea about how the Panama Canal worked at all. But after reading some stuff and watching a couple of videos, I think I have a decent handle on it. And so they built the canal over some mountains. Then they dug down in those mountains just a little bit and created a path for water to travel. Then they flooded that pathway from a river close by, and the ships flow through that, elevating through these locks that get flooded and raised, and they raise the ship to the next level until it gets across the mountain. And so I had no idea that's how it worked at all. Like I said before that, I thought it was just they dug a creek and they put some water in there. This is really like an elaborate system of locks and water flows. And I heard on another podcast that they were talking about. They said that it's something. It's an insane amount of gallons of fresh water that takes like every like ship to get through there, and they lose like half of it every time. But that's a whole different conversation. But so if what I just said to you makes no sense, there are plenty of videos out there that will fully explain it. And so what comes next? We'll get back to the actual construction of the canal. What comes next is a series of men that are put in the position of chief engineer. And they tried to get the canal built, but run into the same problems that the French did. And they eventually Teddy Roosevelt, he puts Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals in charge. And they say he did this because he was all the other guys had quit, and he was a guy that couldn't quit. He worked for the army. It's like, you're under a contract, bro. So he did that. And Goethals finally he writes the ship. And one of the first things he did was really decide on doing the lock canal as opposed to the sea canal. And this guy, he did some slick stuff as well. When they were running behind on their deadline to try to actually get it done in the later years, he used mental warfare to con his workers into working harder. And so he basically separated them by military and civilian and told the other side that they were better than the other. And it worked, because the canal was built on time. And Woodrow Wilson actually pressed the button for the bomb that blew the little piece of the mountainside in 1914 that created the water flow. And I looked more into this because I just thought that just sounds a little too futuristic for 108 years ago. And it turns out I'm kind of right. So it turns out like he either pressed the button like that off of, they either pressed the button off of receiving a telegram from him, or his telegram machine was connected to the dynamite, which I don't know about the latter this time, But if you haven't, you should check out some pictures or videos of the creation of the canal. It is huge. I didn't know it was that. I didn't know it was as big as it was. It is ginormous is a pretty decent word to apply to it. In 1914, the SS Ancon, A-N-C-O-N, becomes the first ship to pass through the Panama Canal. And the ship was renamed for the purpose of the canal, which not a lot of things I saw said that. But yeah, I forget what it was. It had like an Indian name, I think, before that. The Schwash-Tu, something like that. But yeah, they renamed it that because I don't remember the actual reason, but like as far as like what that word means, but it was because those ships, that ship ended up being a ship that its main job was to carry things back and forth across the Panama Canal. It really didn't go off, to other parts of the world too often. All right, and so there's one more thing I want to talk about before we head on to the next topic, and it is about the types of ships that go on to that go through the Panama Canal. And a lot of different ships can, but they make these specific types of ships that are the exact like specifications of the Panama Canal, and they're called Panamax ships. And it sounds like it would be awesome, and I guess it is. They make these things, but these ships are literally, like I said, the same exact like dimensions of like the locks before they get to like there's like a lake up there. I forgot, I didn't really mention, called Gatun Lake, which is the main part after you float through the locks and you get to a kind of, I guess, a plateau. And then that's like the lake, and you float there for like 20 something miles, and you go back down through similar locks on the other side, and you get back out. That's how it really kind of works. But these Panamax ships are evidently designed to be like the exact size of the dimensions of the locks, I guess, is pretty much what I got, because they say it's really difficult to actually maneuver these ships because you don't have much leeway. These ships are, like I said, they're almost a spitting image of the actual path they're trying to traverse. And that is how the Panama Canal happened. And now it's time for the roundup. And we're going to round it up. The idea of creating the Panama Canal dates back to the 1500s. The French are the first to try to create a canal in Panama. The first ship passes through in 1914, and Panama would regain control of the canal in 1999. Things I didn't know before. And now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, so the things I didn't know before. Let's see. So it took 9 years and 24,000 workers to create the pathway for the canal alone. So it took almost a decade for just them to create like the place where like the water could go. I just thought that was pretty wild. When it's something that I don't even think about. You always think about like the total, or how many people worked on it or whatever, but it's like it took almost 10 years for them just to carve out the path. And so the next one, let's see, it takes for a ship, it takes about 8 to 10 hours on average for a ship to travel through the Panama Canal. I know I saw some higher estimates, and depending on the type of ship and stuff like that, it can take longer. But I thought that what I saw was this was about the average. And this next one was kind of what I was talking to you about earlier. It's about the amount of fresh water that it takes for a ship to get through. It's 52 million gallons of fresh water to move a ship from one side of the canal to the other. That's wild. And then, like I said, the podcast that I was listening to said about half of it gets absorbed back into the system, back into the lake, and then the other half just gets lost into the actual, like, their respective oceans, either the Atlantic or the Pacific. And the sad part about that is that Gatun Lake is evidently the source of fresh water for that main region of Panama. And so it's like they're just losing water every day, every transfer. And the last one, let's see, the last one here, there's a toll to cross the canal, which I assumed, I guess I never really thought about. The largest one ever on record is $150,000, but that's not that important to me. The cheapest one is that when there was a man who swam across it in the early 20s by a man by the name of Richard Halliburton, I believe his name was, and they charged him 36 cents, so his body was worth 36 cents at that time. And that's just a little interesting fact that I did not know at all. All right, that's been another episode of HDTH. I want to thank you guys for always coming back and press and play with me week to week here. Trying to grow, trying to just keep putting out episodes and seeing where it goes. Like and subscribe, like I said, wherever you consume your podcasts. I realize there's so many other different places besides where I actually consume them, places like Podbean or Good Pod or all those different places. So if you're on there, give me a like and a subscribe and a comment, and I'll see you guys next week.